This story was sent to me by a man named Marco. He's an architect from Palermo, 34 years old, and he specializes in the restoration of historical buildings, churches mostly. Sicily has hundreds of them, some dating back to the 12th century. Crumbling stone chapels scattered through mountain villages where fewer than 50 people still live. Marco's job is to assess their structural integrity, determine if they can be saved or if they should be left to collapse. In November of 2021, he was hired by the Diocese of Sicily to evaluate a small church in the Madoni Mountains. The church was in a village I'll call Pietramonte, which is not its real name. Marco asked me not to use the real name. He said the people who still live there would know it was him who talked. Pietramonte sits at about 900 meters elevation on a ridge overlooking a valley filled with chestnut and oak forest. The road that leads to it is a single lane of cracked asphalt with no guardrails. The village has 11 permanent residents. All of them are over 60. There is no shop, no bar, no school, just stone houses with wooden shutters, a cracked fountain that still runs, and at the highest point of the village, the church. The church was built in 1583. It's dedicated to San Michele Arcangelo, Saint Michael the Archangel, the one who cast the devil out of heaven. Marco told me that in Sicilian tradition, churches dedicated to San Michele are almost always built at the highest point of a village. Because Michael stands at the boundary between heaven and hell, the church is meant to be a barrier, a seal, a door that stays shut. Marco drove up on a Tuesday morning in late November. Cold, foggy, the kind of fog that doesn't lift. It just sits in the valley like something breathing. He parked at the edge of the village because the streets were too narrow for his car. He walked up the cobblestone path toward the church carrying his equipment: laser measure, camera, clipboard. He passed an old woman sitting on a plastic chair outside her house. He said good morning. She looked at him. She looked at the equipment in his hands. Then she said, "You're going to the church?" It wasn't a question. Marco said yes. He explained he was there for the diocese. The woman nodded slowly. Then she said, "Don't go alone, and don't stay after the light changes." Marco smiled. He assumed she meant don't stay after dark. Standard advice in these mountain villages where there are no streetlights. He thanked her and kept walking. The church was at the top of a flight of stone stairs, maybe 30 steps, worn smooth by centuries of feet. The wooden doors were tall, dark, swollen with moisture. One of them was slightly open, a gap of about 10 centimeters. Marco pushed it wider and stepped inside. The interior was cold, colder than outside. He could see his breath. The church was small, maybe 15 meters long, with a barrel-vaulted ceiling covered in faded frescoes. Saints with cracked faces, angels whose eyes had flaked away. The plaster was falling in sheets. The pews were still there, dark wood, arranged in 2 rows. At the far end, the altar, stone, simple, a wooden crucifix above it. But the figure of Christ had fallen off at some point. The cross was empty, just 2 bent nails where the hands had been. Marco set up his equipment and started working, measuring walls, checking for cracks, photographing the damage. Standard procedure. He worked for about 2 hours, and then he noticed the smell. It came gradually, not sudden, a slow build, like something rotting beneath the floor, not animal decomposition. He knew what that smelled like from other old buildings. This was different, sweeter, heavier, like overripe fruit mixed with something chemical, something that burned the back of his throat. He checked the floor. Solid stone, no visible gaps or breaks. The smell seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He opened a window to ventilate. The air outside was clean, but the moment he stepped back toward the altar, the smell returned, stronger now, concentrated near the front of the church. He knelt at the base of the altar and put his hand on the stone floor. It was warm. The rest of the church floor was cold. Stone in November in a mountain village at 900 meters should be freezing, but the floor in front of the altar was warm, not faintly warm, warm like a living body, like something beneath the stone was generating heat. Marco stood up. He stepped back from the altar, and that's when he heard it, a sound from below, from under the floor, a low sound, rhythmic, like breathing, but too slow to be human. One breath every 10 or 12 seconds, deep, wet, as if whatever was exhaling had fluid in its lungs. He stood perfectly still and listened. The breathing continued, steady, patient, unhurried, and then, mixed into the sound, something else, a voice, not words, not a language he recognized, a kind of murmuring, low and continuous, like someone reciting something over and over, a prayer, or the opposite of a prayer. It rose and fell in a pattern that reminded him of liturgy, the rhythm of a mass, but wrong, inverted, as if someone had taken the structure of a Catholic service and turned it inside out. Marco told me he stood there for almost 3 minutes, unable to move, not because he was frozen with fear, but because the sound was pulling him forward. He said it was like gravity, like the murmuring wanted him to step closer to the altar, to kneel, to put his ear against the warm stone and listen. He didn't. He picked up his equipment. He walked to the door, and as he reached the threshold, the murmuring stopped, all at once, mid-syllable, and in the silence that followed, something hit the door. From the inside, a single heavy impact, like a fist or a shoulder, something slamming against the wood from within the church. The door shook in its frame. Dust fell from the lintel. Marco was already outside. He was already on the stone stairs. He didn't look back. He walked down to the village. The old woman was still sitting in her chair. She looked at his face and said, "You heard it." Marco sat down on the low wall across from her. His hands were shaking. He asked her what was under the church. She told him. In 1971, the village had a priest. His name was Padre Ferrante. He had served the church for 22 years. He was quiet, devoted, respected. He said Mass every Sunday and heard confessions every Saturday. The village was small enough that he knew every sin committed within its borders. In the spring of that year, something changed. Padre Ferrante stopped saying Mass. He locked the church doors and wouldn't let anyone in. The villagers could see candlelight through the windows at night, sometimes until dawn. They could hear his voice inside, but not praying, not in Italian, not in Latin, in something else, something that made the dogs in the village howl. After 3 weeks, the bishop in Cefalù sent 2 priests to check on him. They arrived on a Thursday. They entered the church. They came out 14 minutes later. One of them was crying. The other would not speak for 2 days. They told the bishop that Padre Ferrante had dug up the floor in front of the altar. He had excavated a hole, maybe a meter deep, into the earth beneath the stone. He was sitting inside the hole, in the dirt, surrounded by candles. The walls of the hole were covered in writing, scratched into the earth with his fingernails. The writing was not Italian, not Latin, not any language either priest recognized. Padre Ferrante looked up at them from the hole and smiled, and he said, in a voice that the younger priest later described as not entirely his own, "I found what Michael was standing on. They removed him from the church. He was taken to a hospital in Palermo. The hole was filled. The stone was replaced. The church was reconsecrated by the bishop himself. Padre Ferrante died in the hospital 4 months later. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but the nurses who cared for him told a different story. They said that in his final weeks, he stopped sleeping entirely. He would stand at the window of his room, facing south toward the mountains, and whisper all night, the same low murmuring, the same inverted rhythm, and in the morning, the wall behind his bed would be warm to the touch. The old woman told Marco one more thing. She said that after Padre Ferrante was removed, the village sealed the church. No one went inside for years. But sometimes, on certain nights, when the fog sat heavy in the valley and the wind was still, you could hear it. The church praying by itself, not the sound of wind through broken windows, not the creaking of old wood, but a voice, low, rhythmic, coming from beneath the altar, reciting something in a language that no one in the village could name. And on those nights, the dogs wouldn't bark, the cats hid under the houses, and every door in the village was locked with a line of salt across the threshold. Marco submitted his report to the diocese. He recommended that the church be structurally condemned and permanently sealed. He noted water damage, foundation cracks, ceiling collapse risk. All true, all real. But in the margins of his notebook, in handwriting, he told me he doesn't fully remember writing. He had written one sentence. The floor is breathing. He has not been back to Pietromorta. He told me he sometimes wakes up at night, around 3 a.m, and for a few seconds, before his mind is fully awake, he can hear it, the murmuring, low, patient, rhythmic, coming from somewhere beneath him.